Good morning. Thank you, Skip, for that very kind introduction. We love coming to the Clinton School. The Clinton School is unique among our institutions of higher learning, and how wonderful that the Clinton School includes the nonprofit's arts in its course of study. So many students here at the Clinton School have come down and made the Rep a part of their study, and how the arts contribute to our quality of life is central to the study of our community and how our community works. And so we are honored to be here today, and we thank the Clinton School for everything they do for our city and our state and for the students who study here. Today we are talking about To Kill a Mockingbird. How many of you have read To Kill a Mockingbird? How many of you have seen the movie? You know, I'm going to have our panel introduce themselves in just a second, but in 2006, the Association of British Librarians ranked To Kill a Mockingbird #1 in books that you should read before you die. #2 was the Bible. They were British, so it's all right. Let's start at the far end and introduce our panel of actors. These are representatives of the cast that have come from all over the country or right at home. Jason, introduce yourself. Let them know what role you're playing and where you're from.
Certainly. My name's Jason Collins. I'm playing the role of Bob Hupp. I'm originally from Seattle, but I'm based out of New York now.
I'm John Feltch. I'm playing Atticus Finch. And I grew up in Boston, but I've lived in North Carolina and Texas much longer than I ever lived in Boston. So.
Michael Jones, and I play Tom Robinson. I'm based out of New York, but I am from here, Little Rock, Arkansas.
Hi, I'm Kathy McCafferty. I'm originally from Boston, but I live in New York City now, and I play Jean Louise Finch, the grown-up scout.
And what we'll do today is I'll talk a little bit about the play in general. I'll pose some specific questions to our actors, and then we'll open it up for your questions and comments about the play. You know, it's interesting. We're in our 36th season. In the course of the past 36 years, this is the second time the Rep has done To Kill a Mockingbird. We did it originally in 1998. And here we're launching a 3-week run. We had our first preview last night. It opens officially on Friday and runs for 3 weeks. We are going to announce in a day or two that we're going to add a couple of performances because the performances that are currently open have been booked up, which is great. In fact, this play is one of the fastest selling plays in the history of the Rep. And it made all of its financial goals a week before it opened, which has never happened in the 36-year history of the Rep. Once that happened, I told the actors I was just going to go home and they could figure the rest of it out. But they've been working hard. It's a 22-day rehearsal process that concludes officially on Friday. You know, you all raised your hands when you said you had read the novel. Most of you have seen the movie, which means that one of our goals as storytellers is already off the table, and that is telling you a plot of an engaging story. There's no surprise necessarily when we learn what happens to Tom Robinson, when we learn what happens to Boo Radley. You know that. We know that. We know that story. So why would the Rep want to launch this play again, and why would so many people want to see it? Well, I think the simple answer is because it's a great story. Because it touches our lives in so many ways, and because we have such memories, nostalgic memories perhaps, of reading the novel or seeing the film. But as creative artists, as theater artists, we can't create nostalgia, and we can't create something that lives in our minds collectively. We have to tell our story as if we are looking at this play for the first time, as if it is a brand new play that's never seen the light of day before. And so, you know, our work at the Rep begins several months before the actors arrive. In fact, in the creative arc, the actors are the last piece of the puzzle, the most important piece. I needed to say that, I think. There are more of them than me, but nonetheless, the last piece of the creative equation. And so, we begin with asking, why do we want to tell this story now? And theaters around the country are doing To Kill a Mockingbird because it was recently the 50th anniversary, 2010, of the publishing of the book. Harper Lee had the book published in 1960. It was turned into a movie in 1962, and it was turned into a play in 1990. It is loosely based on Harper Lee's own childhood, growing up in Monroeville, Alabama. Interestingly, the play, which was written in 1990, premiered in Monroeville, Alabama, and is produced there by the citizenry every May. You can go down and see To Kill a Mockingbird. Harper Lee, who lives there, says she's never seen it. She is something of a recluse. She gave her last interview about To Kill a Mockingbird in 1964. But the life, you can say, she would say it's not necessarily her life. Her dad, A.C. Lee, did defend an African-American man and son early in his life. He was an attorney. He did lose a case, lost that case, and those men were tried for murder, convicted, and executed. He never tried another capital case in his life. And you can say, she would say, or that those events, she did have an older brother who was 4 years her senior, just like the relationship between Scout and Jem in the play. She did have a best friend growing up who just happened to become later in life Truman Capote, and which is an odd thing, that here in this little town, this little boy would come and visit, and he lived in the neighborhood, and he grew up to be Truman Capote, and she grew up to be Harper Lee. So those are true. We can go back to the historic record and seek out those truths and know that she's telling a story about her childhood. The play differs in significant ways from the novel and from the film. And that's something that we always wrestle with when our images of the characters in the play are either from the book or from a very famous film. When the film was made in 1962, it cost $2 million to make, and it grossed $20 million, which was a big hit at the time. It had 8 Academy Awards, won 3 Academy Awards, including Best Adapted Screenplay, for the playwright Horton Foote, who was a Texan, wrote Trip to Bountiful, among other things, and was one of our great accomplished playwrights of the last 30 or 40 years. So a playwright did write the screenplay, although that's not what the play is based on. A guy named Christopher Sergel wrote the play in 1990. But when you approach such an iconic play, and the creative process begins when we decide whose story are we going to tell. Well, this one is an easy answer. We're telling Jean Louise's story. She's the narrator. It's her voice. The play comes to life through her memory. The play is set in 1935, but Jean Louise is not telling the story in 1935. Once Kathy was cast in the role, we assumed Kathy's age was somewhere. We've been through this before, and I've embarrassed myself. I know. So let's just say that for rough mathematics, Kathy is between 30 and 40 years old, which would mean that the play is set in roughly 1965. And so Kathy's character comes to us in the play. In the film, it's just a voice, but in the play, it's a real person. So we have to set the play based on the character's age, or based on the actress's age. So it's 1965, which just happens to be, of course, in the height of the Civil Rights Movement, which, of course, the play is very important to that movement. So, we're going to tell Jean Louise's, Scout's, story. And we have to create a physical world that lives on our stage and not in our imaginations or not in a film. And so the set designer, Mike Nichols, who is our resident set designer, and I sat down to talk about the physical world of the play. And that's where a lot of, the decisions, concrete decisions have to be made. Because, you say to the actors can't act ideas or themes. But our world has to be real and embody those themes. And so we began, Mike Nichols and I began. Mike read the novel, and created a map, a city map, the way the play describes where everything is and what the relationship is among the houses. Then we looked at our stage, because you always create theater works of art in the context of a space, and theater is defined by the space it's created in. In our space, it happens to be what we call a modified proscenium. There's a picture frame with a 12-foot lip called an apron on the downstage side of the picture frame, and 26 feet of stage space behind or upstage of that apron, and a 40-foot wide opening and a 30-foot high roof. And so in that void, we create a three-dimensional space. And Mike began with a map and created the town. And then we distilled that town down to what could work on our stage. The play is very episodic. Jean Louise comes and moves the story along. The play happens in the course of a summer. The book happens over the course of 3 years. So over the course of a summer, we're telling many stories. It's the story of Boo Radley, and it's the story of Tom Robinson. And so Mike designed what is essentially a memory play, the recreation of good and evil on the stage. The good in Scout's 9-year-old mind being the home she grew up in, the Finch home. Evil in her mind being the Radley home. And so the play happens between those polar opposites of good and evil. I believe the thing that touches me about this play and why I wanted to direct this play is because I believe this play embodies what Oscar Wilde said best in Lady Windermere's Fan when he said, all of us are living in the gutter. Some of us are looking at the stars. And I believe that's what this play embodies. And so Mike created this world that I think captures that spirit. And so once we have created this world and our costume designer comes in and does the realistic creation of costumes, because you want the tactile world to be real even if their environment is abstracted. So our design is an abstraction of good and evil, an abstraction of this town that Scout grew up, or the street that Scout grew up on, and this courtroom where the trial happened. And now we bring in the actors to create life, breathe life into this world that we have been envisioning and creating. And so we went to New York, we did our casting process, we cast here locally as well. It's a cast of 22. And I just have to say before I forget, you know, in the rehearsal process, you break the play down. When you're working as a director, you have to break the play down into manageable chunks, into rehearsal scenes. Sometimes you break them down into what are called French scenes, which is when actors come in or out of a scene or a major turn of action happens. Those are called French scenes. And when you break To Kill a Mockingbird down, it breaks down into about 20 of these scenes over the course of its 2-hour length. 18 of those 20 scenes are driven by children, young actors, kids. And obviously they're not here today because they are in school. But here are kids who go to school every day in our community, and these 3 kids drive the action of this play, and they are so good and have been such pros that they have challenged all of these professional actors to rise to their level. And we are delighted that these young artists who come out of our young artist program at the Rep are doing such a good job with such very tough roles. And so they aren't here today, but I have to point out what an exceptional young actors they are and how lucky we are. We couldn't have done this play if we didn't think we had the young actors to do it. But now here are some of the older actors. John, I'm going to start with you. One of the first things I said to the actors when I hired them is, don't watch the movie. Because you get those images in your head, they're hard to shake. And I don't want to just try to recreate the movie. So, of course, to throw everybody off the scent, I hired a tall, handsome, dark-haired man to play Atticus Finch. So, John. Yes, my pleasure. So, tell us about creating Atticus Finch. And as you're doing that, we'll also remember that you've played Atticus before at the Alley Theatre in Houston.
Correct,
So
yeah.
talk a little bit about also what it's like to recreate the role.
Well, obviously, first of all, it's more than a little daunting when everyone has in their head this iconic performance of Gregory Peck. And when I did this before at the Alley Theatre in Houston, which was about 6 years ago, I had to deal with that the intensity of that pressure to just let that go, let my memories of that performance go, and do my own version of Atticus and try to bring as much of my own experience and my own emotional life to that character. But what's interesting is people have such strong connections with the story itself that, you know, at least my hope is, and this was my experience in Houston, that after, you know, the first couple of minutes, everyone can get over, oh, he's like Gregory Peck, oh, he's not like Gregory Peck, whatever the reaction may be. It's kind of a Rorschach because we have images from that film. And of course, Bob said, don't watch the film, but I've seen it about 80 times because I love the film and the story very much. But as everyone will tell you, playing an iconic kind of character, one can't think in the abstract as an actor. One has to think in the moment, in a muscular, visceral, emotional way. Now, granted, Atticus is a more cerebral sort of a character, but it's interesting. His connection to the children, his connection to the town, his connection to ideas of justice, etc. I mean, it's all intermingled. So, but obviously, a lot of people identify with him not only as a father figure, but as an attorney. When we did it in Houston, I can't tell you how many attorneys talked to me later about Atticus being an inspiration for them when they were young. One hopes they continue to be like Atticus. One doubts it somewhat. But anyway, he's an unusual guy. I mean, we can go on about that later, but you know, he's a single dad, and he treats his children in a remarkably mature. He treats them as mature entities, and especially if you think about that in 1935, it's really exceptional. I mean, they call him Atticus for one thing, and he treats them perhaps too much as young adult minds.
Well, they do. Everybody talks to the kids like they're little adults.
Yeah.
And, you know, the play operates on a couple of levels. The play operates on the family level of it taking a village to raise Atticus's kids on this street in 1935 in this old town. And so all the characters we meet are the people who help raise Atticus's children. And then the play operates, of course, on that larger level of the trial and what the trial means to the lives of these people, and then thematically what the play says about when these two worlds, the world of Atticus, the sort of sheltered world of 1935 of Atticus's kids, and when the real world smacks them in the face, that's the conflict of the play. That's the experience that we come to when we see this play. But it really, you know, the original title of the novel, Harper Lee's original title, was Atticus. And so she really wanted the play to be about this father figure. John, what's the first thing when you're working on a character like Atticus? Where do you go first?
First, I reread the novel again, probably for the third or fourth time. It's an amazing book, obviously. There's so much more complexity than in the novel, needless to say, than one can get in a film or in a play. But then once you go through the kind of narrative needs of the character, where he starts and where he finishes in the story, what his relationship is with every single person in that story, then you have to start to go towards your own memories of people that remind you in your life of that man, and do more internal work that way to try to make it as tangible and real to yourself as humanly possible. One thing that interests me about this story, and it says a lot of good things about America, is that it's not at all the rosy, sentimental piece that I think some of us think may have thought it was. It's actually, you know, for those kids to confront racism in all of its ugliness, and that turning point in a child's life when a child realizes how ugly the world can be. It's a demanding piece in that respect. It's not all sunshine and roses by any means. And so there's that. I mean, to me, there's the kind of shadings within Atticus, for instance. Anyone who is perceived as heroic has his flaws as well, and has his you know, his apprehensions about the world. For one thing, A.C. Lee wasn't a trial lawyer, and one of the things you struggle with playing Atticus is he normally did people's wills and lawsuits involving property. He rose to the occasion to defend Tom Robinson, but he is not by nature a trial lawyer, and not by nature someone who calls attention to himself. So there's something, to me, very significant about that. He is a reluctant hero. But of course, you don't think of yourself as a hero when you're playing a hero.
Right, you can't. The heroicism comes from situation.
Yes.
Not because the character is heroism often arises from situations where average people rise to an occasion that's extraordinary.
Right.
Right. Let me ask Jason. You may recognize Jason if you saw the Reps production of the 39 Steps, which we did in June of last year. Jason was one of the clowns. If we put him in a dress, you might have an easier time recognizing him.
I can't tell you how many times I hear that.
And in our production, Jason plays Bob Ewell. And at our preview last night, at the curtain call, Jason was booed, which is probably an appropriate response to the character who plays. You'll recall Bob Ewell is sort of the villain, the racist villain in the play who sets off the chain of events that leads to the conviction of Tom Robinson. So, Jason, I have two questions for you. One is, similar to what I asked John, is you're playing a role that just drips with evil. But we know that as actors, we have to incorporate the sort of cliche among acting is honor your character. So how do you honor Bob Ewell? That's question number one. Second question is it different preparation as an actor for like a play like 39 Steps, where you played 20 different characters and it's a comedy and fairly superficial fun, versus a different preparation for you for Bob Ewell? So let's talk first about how do you honor a character that is just so bad?
Irredeemable, I think, is the word. That's a really great question, and it's a tough job. Going into something like this, that it is essentially your job to be the bad guy, because the story calls for it. And, as much as we have a hero, we need an antagonist as well, and someone to resent and to perhaps even hate while we watch the story. The fact that I got booed at the curtain call last night, actually, I was okay with that, because I feel like, A, that means I'm doing my job, and B, I love that the audience gets to have that little release and that little say-so at the end, I think that it feels kind of good to go, "Cool," at the end of it, and let it be known how you feel and how you were affected. And the fact that you were affected is also encouraging to me. Last night in particular was a really interesting night, because it was a primarily African-American audience. And of course, we used the N-word several times in the show, not just my character, but a few people. And I was talking to all of the actors, and everybody was really uncomfortable. Not just those of us who have to say it over and over again. Just people who were on stage while we said it were kind of like, and we felt a little queasy afterwards. And we got off stage and we're like, oh, wow, that's really not an easy thing to do. And people were finding that it was difficult to not just sort of instinctually try to soften their performances in order to hopefully be less offensive. And there was a whole lot of just interesting sort of knee-jerk reactions and tendencies happening on stage that, in some ways, one would argue are interfering with our ability to tell the story as honestly as we can. And I guess that sort of, in a lot of ways, sums up what it means to honor a character like this. It is stomach churning to behave in some of the ways that my character behaves and say some of the things that my character says. And yet, to go there unflinchingly is to accurately portray a real thing that is part of our history and part of our culture and shouldn't be ignored or underplayed. And I feel like if one can truly put oneself aside and become or indulge in being this truly ugly other person, you are in effect serving as a really valuable reminder to certainly younger people who haven't necessarily seen the full ugly brunt of bigotry and racism. But to everybody, I mean, our history is often, I think, underplayed and softened and candy-coated and perhaps even just not addressed at all. And so I feel that that's one of the greatest rewards about, even though it hurts to do it, even though you know, you feel like you have to go home and shower afterwards, it's still a valuable service. And to not just be an atypical villain, this is from the actor perspective. You know, it's easy to get caught up in just the villain kind of approach to playing a bad guy, whereas if you can come up with some real people that you have come across in your life who exhibit some of these characteristics, or who perhaps carry some of these opinions, and incorporate who they are and why they are, and create, you know, a real three-dimensional person and not just a two-dimensional cardboard cutout bad guy. I think that also serves the story incredibly well and makes a richer experience for the entire process.
Now let's go to part two of that question. How do you, as an actor, is there a difference in preparing for a role like Bob Ewell versus a role that many of these folks saw you play in 39 Steps, which was the total opposite? As in the actor's process, is there a difference?
Absolutely. I mean, in a way they're identical, because you're still making sure that you're physically ready, warmed up, and capable of doing what you need to do. You're making sure that you're vocally ready to deliver what you need to deliver. You're going through a lot of the same steps that an athlete would to do their job, you know. But the mental the mental preparation is completely different. And you know, for something like 39 Steps, it's all about getting used to being able to think and fast forward, and what comes next and what comes next and what comes next and what comes next, because it moves so fast. And if you're not screaming out the dialogue, you're changing your clothes as fast as you can, or you're pushing a piece of scenery as fast as you can, or you're running around to the other side of the stage so you can get back on as another guy. I mean, it moves so fast that 90% of your prep is just to get ready to move at superhuman speeds. This one is certainly not anything speed-wise about it. It's about being able to sort of put away my tenderness, I guess, and my empathy and my natural warmth and you know, desire to connect with people around me, kind of burying that and putting that away, and coming up with a sort of an artificial process of closing myself off emotionally and being ready to not connect with people, and getting ready to be angry and scared and small, and therefore be motivated to be the way I have to be in the show. Exactly.
Do you guys share a dressing room?
We do, yeah.
That must be unpleasant.
No, it is. It's really interesting, though. I mean, obviously, we all get along wonderfully backstage, and there's never an issue there. And I don't mean to try to paint the picture that I'm suddenly, like, abysmal to be around right before the show. That's not true at all. It's very much an internal thing that I do all by myself, and nobody knows about it. But it is really fascinating how much I need to not watch a lot of the show, because there are such beautiful moments with kids and John, and so many of the actors in the show have such wonderful moments of true relating to one another and caring for one another and nurturing one another. And there's moments of exceptional pain where characters are confronted with, you know, terrible news and are obviously heartbroken. I stand in the wings before some of my entrances, and some of these things are going on stage, and I have realized that I cannot pay attention because I want to stand in the wing and go, oh. And I can't do that. I have to sit there and go, you know, and be untouched and unmoved and ready to be a shriveled lump of coal of a person. So it's tricky, and it's an interesting process for sure.
Well, let me go to the other side of the spectrum and talk to Michael. Michael, we spend 2 hours talking about your character on stage, and you get one long scene on stage. And you know, if there is criticism leveled at To Kill a Mockingbird, it's often leveled in the fact that the characters, particularly the African-American characters, are kind of one-dimensional, that we don't get to see well-rounded characters. On the other hand, your character is central to everything that happens throughout the course of the play. So in terms of your preparation for this, talk a little bit about Tom Robinson. And then my follow-up question is going to be the fact that you know, 13 years ago you were a student at North Little Rock High, and now you're an actor in New York. And how do we connect those two dots? But let's begin by asking you to talk about your character and playing Tom Robinson, who, you know, we literally see in one scene in the whole play.
We do see Tom Robinson just in one scene, but he's talked about throughout the entire show, just about you know, just what a good man he was, the predicament he's in. Preparing for this role, just sort of doing research on the time and knowing that when this happened to black men more often than not, they were given, just like say he's an attorney who does wills, you know, or they were given a patent attorney, someone who just wasn't somebody who was unqualified, basically. Just like, you defend him, you know, he's going down anyway. But to just put myself in that situation, really, is very mental, just to sit there and know that I was only trying to be a good person. I was helping out. Even though she was a white woman, I was helping her. And now here I am, because she accused me of, you know, what she accused me of. So just to sit there knowing, just processing all of that really just helps me with the role, and just being real, being raw, and not how Michael feels. Michael would want to cry if this happened, but Tom is just a stronger man. Tom knows this is the situation, this is what's happening around me today. There's nothing I can do. I just have to maintain. I have to be strong. So that's, I mean, I guess that's one of the ways I prepared for the role, just doing research. And I mean, there's tons and tons of cases. Like Bob told us to look over the Scottsboro Boys, which is a case, I don't know if it's loosely based on this or it's just...
Well, Harper Lee would say no,
yeah.
But it was a case that dominated headlines in the 1930s, at a time when she was growing up. And certainly the idea of being falsely accused by a white woman is a common thread to this play.
Yeah, and so just doing research on that, and also just knowing that they were given a patent attorney. Eight men were given a patent attorney, and it just took 2 white women to say, you know, they raped me, and that's all they needed to hear. So it was just, you know, the case went on for years, but just to know that that was commonplace. And yeah, you asked me about how.
Well, you know, it is. I think it would be a very tough role to play, because he doesn't give the opportunity to lash back at all. He gets one little dig with his last line when the prosecutor says, "Are you, you know, are you? What does he say? You're being impudent to me."
You're being impudent. Yeah.
And you get one little pushback on him, and that's all you get. Last night, though, this was interesting. You got great response. There's an exchange in the play where the prosecutor says, he says, this and this happened, and Tom's character says, no, it didn't. And the white girl said things happened this way, and Tom says it happened this way. And the prosecutor says, are you saying that this white woman is lying? And Tom's response is,
I don't say she's lying, I say she's mistaken in her mind.
And that line got a huge reaction last night because it was, when we talked about this in rehearsal, we talked about the trap that was being set for Tom Robinson and how Tom Robinson avoided that trap with the perfect answer in the context. And those are the things that make Tom Robinson an interesting character. But you don't get much, we don't ever see him with his wife, we don't ever see him with his kids. We only learn about him through the voices of other characters, what other people say about him. And that's a tough thing to do on stage because, you know, we hear all about you and that you get just the opportunity to testify. You don't even have any blocking.
Yeah, walk from the defendant's chair to the witness chair. And
the actors, you know, when you're staging a play, obviously a big part of the play from a director's point of view is telling the story visually, editing where your eye as an audience member will go, you know, on stage. In film, the film editor decides where your eye will go in a particular shot. But on stage, you know, one of my jobs is to create relationships among the characters on stage to focus your eye, to keep your eye moving in the direction I want your eye to move. And Tom's character literally gets up from a chair, walks over, sits down in another chair, and talks for 15 minutes. And so there's not a lot of visual story to Tom. It's all in the telling.
And to say that, just coming from a largely musical theater background, it was just, it's great for me to just be able to have to just sit down and act instead. Sometimes I want to tap my feet. I'm thinking, okay, we got a big 11 o'clock number coming up, but this is, it's raw, it's real. Tom is not going to sit there and tap his feet in the courtroom. He's not humming, he's not singing. I know, no big hand gestures. I might kind of wiggle my foot, but it's just great to be.
We'll work in some jazz hands for Tom when he's convicted or something, right? Yeah. Hey, so speaking of musical theater, you tell us about, were you a musical theater kid at North Little Rock High?
I was indeed a musical theater kid.
And so what did you do? You went off and...
I went off to the University of Ole Miss and studied acting there. And then as soon as I graduated, I did summer stock and moved to New York City. And I auditioned, I got a national tour with a musical, and I came back. I was on the road for 2 years and just living in New York City and acting and waiting tables. And then I sort of got into an acting class and rededicated myself to acting, you know. And so I got this audition, went audition for Bob, and it turned out really well. And I get to be home for the first, you know, this is my first job in 2 years, and to come back to it all and be home around my family and my friends and my teachers, it's great. And
you know, I didn't know you were from North Little Rock when I cast you.
No, did not.
Yeah, I didn't know that. It wasn't like, oh, there's the hometown guy, we can cast him. No, he was the best actor we saw, and then it became, you know, oh, you're from North Little Rock. So that worked out really well for everybody. Yeah. Let me talk to Kathy for a second here. Kathy, you know, Kathy doesn't interact with any other character in the play. She doesn't. She's just by herself. She's in a different era, in different costuming. And, you know, we talk about the voice in the film. Well, now there's a character on stage. And Kathy and I talked a lot about what do we do with that? Why is she telling this story? Why now? And I came across some writing. Actually, it was on the National Endowment for the Arts Big Read website. About how Harper Lee came to write this novel. It's about 2.5 years she spent working in New York, a variety of jobs. She was an airline, she booked airline flights. She had a number of menial jobs. And at one point in the process of her writing this novel, she got very frustrated. And on a cold winter's night, she opened up the window of her apartment and she chucked the manuscript out the window. And the pages went flying down in the snow. And she called her editor and told her what she had done. And he said, go down there and pick it up. And so we found a way of incorporating that story into our play because we needed a reason for her character to tell the story. What is it? You're playing grown-up Jean Louise, and if we had little Abby Shroud here who plays Scout, and you put them side by side, it works, don't you think?
No, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, but we did not cast Kathy just because she had red hair. That wasn't like, tell us about Jean Louise Finch and playing someone who's both a character and the author?
Well, I think it's an interesting, I like very much what we came up with, and I think it's the difference in having her physically present. Obviously, she's a voiceover in the movie. I think it's just one more way in which people can relate to the story and come into the story, as seeing a grown woman who is struggling with her life. I mean, it's very brief. It's just the point at which the story takes off. So it's very quick. But I think, you know, here's a woman who is, who, as Bob said, was working as an airline reservationist, living in a New York City which couldn't be more different from the town in which she grew up. And she's in her 30s. I mean, she's been out in the adult world for a long time, and this story won't go away. And she has to tell it. And there's something, she can't let it go until she tells it. And so that's sort of where we're starting the play. And it's really interesting the play takes place in her mind, and some of it she's remembering as she's listening, and some of it she's remembering as she's sort of watching. And I think it's an interesting dynamic to be so close to Atticus and her brother and Dill, but far enough away that it creates this a larger sense of longing and a larger sense of needing to revisit these events. And it's really the story to me, I think, especially because the play takes place, as Bob said, over the course of one summer. And it's really what it boils down to for me is the summer of her great awakening. I mean, she starts the play, she and Jem both start the play believing very certain things about their town, certain things about their father, that he's old and that he's not as vivacious and involved as other fathers. And then they see him, gradually they begin to see other sides of him through the course of several events. And she believes certain things about herself and about racism and about a number of things. It's a slow awakening, but it's this quick succession of events that she starts to wake up to the world in a way, into herself. And it's concentrated in the play. And I think it's an interesting thing. I hope for the audience it's an interesting thing to watch the adult that knows what has happened and feels the need to revisit that story and to watch these realizations fall upon this little girl as they're happening in the moment.
Well, interestingly, Christopher Sergel, the adapter of the play, wrote two versions of the play. He wrote one where the narrator is another character, the character of Maudie, the neighbor, and that her voice narrates the play, which, if you look at, which made no sense. I don't know why Maudie was narrating the play, but that character narrated the play to begin with. And then he rewrote the play and made Jean Louise, the grown-up scout, the narrative voice in the play, which is more akin to what the book is, and obviously more also akin to what the novel is. But we had as much liberty with the character of Jean Louise than we did really with any other character, because she's undefined. And so if you have the opportunity to see the play, when Jean Louise, something Kathy and I talked about a lot, and Kathy really explored, was when is Jean Louise present and when is she not present? When is she listening? When is she not listening? It is her play. It is her story. So we wanted her to be present when Atticus leaves the courtroom. We wanted her to be present when Boo Radley brings Jem back to the house. And so having those conversations helped to tell our particular version of the story and get us back to the idea that even though this play is so much a part of our collective lives, we had to make this production our own. And we do that in many ways through the character of Jean Louise. I want to take this opportunity and open up for questions and see what you guys would like to ask of these actors, or anything about the production or anything else we're doing.
Bob, we have mics, and if they'll just wait till we get a mic to them.
That'd be great. Don't everybody jump up at once. What would you like to know? We got a question over here. Here comes the mic right behind you.
I just wanted to know about, did you have to take the play and pare it down at all, or did you just do exactly what the play was? I mean, some of the scenes, obviously, the book has a lot more scenes than the play. Did you have to pare them down, and how did you, if you did?
The play
make
is a
choices?
pared down, you know, the movie is a pared down version of the novel, and the play is a pared down version of the movie. I mean, so it really is winnowing and winnowing and winnowing. What can we bring to life in the 2 hours of our stage? And so we did talk a lot about, you know, the screenplay, because Horton Foote wrote it, the screenplay is beautiful. We did make some adaptations. We added a few lines. Some of that was for practical purposes. Jean Louise has a few more lines than the script has. But I would say yes, there are some changes, some things that we chose to do that we thought brought the story to life more vividly. Not radical, but some, yes.
Don, if you've got how did this one compare to the production you had done 6 years before?
Yeah, careful how you answer that one.
I'm no fool. This one is infinitely better. It's the same play with a totally different group of people and a totally different group of artists, and in Little Rock now, and all of that informs it in a way. It's fascinating. I mean, it's me 5-6 years later with a slightly different way of looking at things. So it's fascinating because it is the same play, but this is proving to be a truly beautiful production, and in a way that I think our communal bond as a cast is quite extraordinary. And you know, like my relationship with the kids. I was teasing the kids when we were making the curtain call the other night, and I said to the kids, if you guys get more applause than me, because they bow just before I get the final bow, because I'm Atticus, I said, if you get more applause than me, I'm going to make your life a living hell. And so last night, our first preview, the kids come off with me at the end of the show, and little Spencer, who plays Dill, said, we got more applause than you. Live with it. It was very funny. But anyway, it's a lovely group of people, and it's been a very remarkably smooth process. I mean, remarkably smooth, yeah.
Yes, well, and, you know, and obviously at the Alley Theater, the Alley's a larger theater. The set was, I assume, very different. The photographs I've seen of your production from back then, very different physical world that you inhabited. And so not just the dynamic of the actor relationship, but also the physical world in that setting was very different. You had a question, ma'am. Let's let her get you that mic.
This is such a great question. Now, I just wondered how Boo Radley is presented, or what his role is in it, because to me that was just another side of someone that fear of something that was so good, you know, the unknown. So I just wondered what you did with that piece.
Well, it's interesting. That's another, you know, when you see the film, of course, you have that image in your mind, you know. And you know, Robert Duvall's first film role. You have to put that aside. And keep in mind that this is a large world, and this is a big cast for us, 21 people in our cast. That's a very large cast. That's musical theater cast size for us. Bigger than our cast for Hamlet of last year. And so when we cast the play, I knew that we would be doubling, that almost all of the men, now interestingly, none of the men here on stage play other roles. They all play just the role they've been assigned. But every other man in the cast plays more than one role, and our other women besides Kathy, also play more than one role. And so our actor who plays Gilmer, who's played by William Wyndham in the film, also plays Boo Radley. And so when I was casting, you know, you do what's called a character scene breakdown, where you look at the various scenes in the play and the characters that are in the play, and then you see where can the doubling occur, where can you not cause. Then there are some rapid costume changes. And we weren't looking to like put fake mustaches and eye patches on the actors so that, ooh, was he or is he not? We just turned the lights down really low. When we talked about Boo, and Boo is another of those characters talked about all the time, only seen for a brief moment. And so we really wanted to understand. We went right to the novel. Always go back to the source. Always go back to the novel was always in the rehearsal process. When there was a question, we went back to the novel. We looked, what did the novel say about it? How does the novel answer this question? All the answers were found in the novel, except for the ones we made up. And then but that's, so the character of Boo is one that I really think is the one that breaks your heart, is the one where you go, all these terrible things have been said about him, and he becomes the hero of the play. And so we really approached just the physicality, what it was like, what that character experienced based on what the novel says about him, and then what we learn about him in the 5 minutes he's on stage. And so we distill all of that we learned about him in the novel to that actor's 5 minutes on stage. And that's, that's all we can do. The actor brings that character to life, and I think he does a pretty good job of it, too. And he's physically imposing, which I think is also something I wanted in the casting. I wanted Boo to be physically imposing, and the actor is a big guy. We need to wrap it up? We're good on time? All right. I want to thank you guys for being here. I want to thank the Clinton School for having us, and I want to thank our actors for coming down here today and visiting with us.